With just days to go before Zimbabwe's crucial national elections, questions are being raised whether the electoral process will actually in fact be transparent. Last week, the country's authorities deported 4 regional democracy activists on arrival at the Gabriel Mugabe International Airport and barred journalists from several international media houses deployed to cover the polls. And last week, a High Court appeal by the main opposition party, Citizens Coalitions for Change, to access the updated voters' roll was ruled as non-urgent. Now, let us get further analysis on this. We are joined by Professor Kealeboga Maphunye, Professor of African Politics at UNISA. Prof, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for joining us. As you've just heard, a very optimistic Chamisa. They're already claiming victory for the upcoming polls. But I mean, amid bribery allegations, reports of some election observers and journalists, as well as researchers being illegally kicked out of the country, should we then expect free and fair elections this time, Prof?
Thank you, Alicia. Good afternoon to your viewers, and thank you for having me. Absolutely, we are in that pre-election phase where people are very excited, but of course, to answer your question, should we expect a free and fair election this time around? That is worrisome, especially in view of those allegations that you have mentioned. And my view is that actually those allegations should not just be left like that. They should be investigated by the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, by the authorities in Zimbabwe, as well as the security forces, to make sure that these elections are the allegations are verified as untrue. Because if they can be found to be true, the prospects of us having a free and fair election will be very, very slim. As for the deportation of people or maybe people not being allowed in the country, we need also verification from the authorities that this has happened and what are the reasons. Because in terms of elections, by the way, countries obviously, because of their sovereignty, they do reserve their rights to allow people to come into their space during elections or to bar them from coming in. So we would actually want to know why they were barred from coming in. Was it because of what they have said previously, or that they pose any threat to the election? Because the idea of a free and fair election is to make sure that you are as transparent as possible and that you allow everyone that is connected to that election or that has an interest in that election to come in.
And speaking of those with an interest to come in, Professor, how important then is the role of election observers in these elections? I mean, we saw in the last elections in Zimbabwe that the EU observers had listed problems with the election, but the African observers had declared them orderly and peaceful.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm glad that you are starting with this issue around the differences within the behavior or the reports of the election observers, because there will be those observers who will look at the same thing and say it was free and fair. And then there will be those who are saying we are not going to make any pronouncements. Some still might say, well, we are making a pronouncement and we believe that the process was not that free, maybe fair, or it was not that fair, maybe free. So the jury is out there. It's about the human beings, the human element. These observers are humans. They observe the same thing, but they might come up with completely different observations, and that is to be expected. However, we do know that election observers play a very, very critical role. How important are they to Zimbabwe this time around? Very, very important. Especially in making sure that there's no pre-election violence, especially in making sure that there are no outrageous, behaviors among the candidates and so on. In fact, as an aside, if I have to mention, I was worried when Mr. Chamisa, mentioned that he has already won, because there's something that we normally call in election management prohibited behavior. Prohibited behavior. One of the examples can be where a candidate comes long before an election to say, I've won the election. You cannot pronounce yourself a winner of an election that hasn't taken place already. So it's, for me, that is worrisome for Mr. Chamisa to say that. And like an election, like any sporting contest or any competition within humanity, it normally has all these tensions. It's tension-filled, emotion-filled. People get very excited because they are already seeing themselves as either presidents or maybe as winners and so on. The idea is to make sure that we focus on the election management rules and regulations and standards of international election management best practices. If we veer away from that, there's going to be issues that will cause disputes, unending disputes, even after that election, which are not very good for that election.
All right, Prof. Unfortunately, because of time, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your sound input there. That was, of course, Professor Kealeboga Maphunye, who is a professor of African politics at UNISA, also weighing in on Zimbabwe's upcoming elections.